Hi, I want to welcome you to the Janet Smith and Tom Curran review. Hi, Janet. How are you today?
Doing great, thanks.
Janet, it's great to be with you, and we're going to get launched right into this program with a prayer. You're going to lead us in prayer, and then we're going to introduce our theme.
All right, thank you. All right, name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, please help Tom and I make sense of the perplexities of the church today. Please be with us in our speech and in our memories, and help us help other people come to terms with the corruption and confusion in our church, but at the same time recognizing that this is your bride, your beautiful bride, even your immaculate bride, to which we are always going to be completely devoted. And we never want to let our faith wobble. We want to keep our faith strong and be willing to bring people into this church by recognizing that it is your church and that the only place where we can get the sacraments and meet Jesus most directly. But there is corruption in the church. We seek to understand it and to know what we might do in order to purify your bride. We ask all of this through Christ our Lord. Amen. Spirit, amen. Now, do remember that we've just named our show.
We did.
Go ahead.
Yes, the Janet Smith and Tom Curran review. Yes, I like that. And we're reviewing a number of things in the program. The last time we were together, we had a chance to take a look at the Legionaries of Christ and that report that came out and that launched into a very interesting conversation, Janet. And it really led up to, I think, the theme that we're going to talk about today, which is, in a certain sense, why are we even doing this? Honestly, when you and I started to converse intensively and regularly after the McCarrick thing unfolded in the middle of 2018, I think both of us were like, let's be at the service to the bishops. Let's be at the service to the priests. They're the ones who are going to step up. They're the leaders, the God-assigned, governors of the church. And so they'll step up and they'll address this crisis. So I think in some ways, the reason why we're doing the Janet Smith and Tom Curran review is because in some ways we haven't seen the level of engagement to address what's happening in the church to the extent that really we think is needed.
Oh, it's absolutely true. I mean, I've been saying now and then that we can't depend on the bishops to do anything because the bishops are the problem. And I don't want to smear every bishop. A bishop took me aside one day and said, "You're smearing all the bishops." And I said, well, and this was in the point that I was reciting Richard Sipes' statement that 30% of the bishops are active homosexuals. And I said, well, I'm not the problem. It's the 30% who are active homosexuals that are the problem. I suspect it's more now, and we'll talk about that because of the condition of the seminaries that produced the bishops that we have today. I do believe there are good bishops in the sense of bishops who are faithful to the church, who are not leading lives of sexual misconduct, who are not embezzling, who are trying to be good, faithful bishops and followers of Christ. I think that they are doing their best to make their diocese orthodox, right? On the other hand, and I think there's several I could name by name who I think are doing that, but I don't want to not mention some, so I won't mention any at the moment. But I think that one of the biggest problems is that most of them have inherited a mess, right? They've inherited a mess. They've inherited a diocese that has priests that are leading double lives, in which there has been cover-up, in which there has been embezzlement, and they don't know what to do about that. They have no mentors, they have no background. Now that they come out of a certain culture that has made them this way, and I know you have a lot to say on that, so tell us what your take is on the culture in the episcopacy or in the church.
Well, Janet, I think one thing that is important for the folks that are engaging with us, whether they're listening or watching, is the degree to which you and I have faithfully served the bishops and priests for decades, literally decades. So just as a for instance, in 1992, I started to work for Father Tom Forrest in a group called Evangelization 2000. And we literally were a worldwide organization promoting St. John Paul II's call for a new evangelization in anticipation of the Great Jubilee year 2000. My job was to oversee the work happening in North America and the Caribbean. So I worked extensively with the bishops in the United States. In fact, I was a consultor to the then NCCB's Committee for Evangelization, precisely at the time when the bishops' Go and Make Disciples National Plan and Strategy for Catholic Evangelization in the United States was promulgated. And so I was very involved in serving bishops around North America, the Caribbean, and through Evangelization 2000, literally around the world. We were working with the Missionaries of Charity to get priests connected with sisters in this effort to spiritually link the prayers of sisters with priests around the world. We put on worldwide retreats for priests at the Vatican involving Mother Teresa and St. John Paul II, and et cetera, et cetera. And here's one of the principles that Father Tom instilled in me, which was, Tom, we don't just show up in a diocese, but we go where we're invited, we work under their authority, and we work to the extent that they desire. And those three principles I've carried with me throughout my life doing church work, that I go where I'm invited. So a bishop has to invite me, or he has to permit it. I work under their authority or one of their delegated representatives, and I work to the extent that they desire. And what that meant is that we were safe. I was going to be safe, that I wasn't going to be a bull in a china shop. I wasn't going to get out of line. And that always left an open door for us to be able to serve. And then after I left Evangelization 2000, in the same way, I've served around the country and in some places around the world. So I have a deep devotion to not just the church, but the church as Christ has constituted her to support these bishops. I just think that's important to know, because I think there are a lot of commentators who are talking about the right now moment in the life of the church, who maybe have watched from the sidelines, or maybe haven't been quite as engaged as we have in like walking alongside them, supporting them, encouraging them, helping them with the resources that we could have and bring to bear. I know that you've done that in many, many ways through your work, through Contraception Why Not, and the extensive teaching ministry you've done, serving bishops and priests around the country and around the world.
Yes, well, I mean, I've always had a little rule in my life that if a bishop asks me to do anything, I'll do it. If I have 4 speaking engagements in a row, and then the 5th Saturday, I'm looking forward to some free time, and a bishop wants me to do it, you do it, right? Because it's a bishop. I taught at a seminary because a bishop wanted me to teach at a seminary. But I suppose that does give us some special insight into bishops. I think there have been bishops who've been trying to promote orthodoxy because of orthodoxy. I'm afraid there's also bishops who've been promoting orthodoxy because it's a smokescreen. They want people to think they're orthodox so that they can continue to live an immoral lifestyle. That's been a new thought to me. It's been a new thought in the last year and a half. Before that, I never thought that. I thought bishops, you just trusted bishops. There's some bad bishops, but there got to be a minority, and they can't be the ones that are really ruling the church. As I mentioned a couple of segments ago, I knew a lot about the sexual abuse crisis in the 70s and the 80s, and then again in the early 2000s. And I had this very naive thought: if I know about it, surely the bishops know about it. And if the bishops know about it, surely they're doing something about it. And then when the McCarrick case came up, I thought they're not doing anything. And I recently spoke to a woman who said, do you think the bishops are trying to figure out what they're going to do about all of these priests under them who are living double lives? And I said, you still don't get it. I said, it's very likely that that bishop or a lot of bishops are leading double lives, and they can't stamp down on something that they are participating in one way or another. And I think we need to talk about this. What is this in one way or another? How did it get to be this way?
Yeah, I think that the first heading, we're going to talk about several headings. One is compromised, and a second is going to be, we'll call clericalism, or just the culture of how leadership operates in the church. And then even talk about the need for more courage and to surrender any sense, really manly courage, stepping up and being willing to take a hit, right? To stand out in front. That these are some of the things that maybe are holding us back today. So let's talk first about this idea of a culture of compromise. I mentioned I spent 5 years in the seminary in a previous program, 2 years for the Archdiocese of Boston, in Boston itself in the minor seminary, and 3 years at the North American College. And it was clear, it became clear to me when I sat down for a dinner, a cena at the North American College with two guys I didn't ordinarily sit with, but I was a guy that was just go sit where you're going to sit and talk to these two guys. And their conversation had all of this sexual innuendo, homosexual sexual innuendo. And I was like, okay, I'm sitting here watching this go back and forth, and I'm thinking, this is really odd and awkward, and yet they're giggling about it. Well, afterwards, a buddy of mine pulled me aside and said, what were you doing having dinner with them? And I'm like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, those two guys are the leaders of the gay community here at the North American College. I'm like, what? The gay community? And it was sort of like, the call it getting red pilled, right? Just the scales. This guy was going to tear the scales from my eyes and let me know about the culture and how it operated at the North American College. And he told me just about one behavior, a grooming behavior, where they would test guys. And if there was a guy that seemed to be potentially vulnerable to be brought into becoming sexually active in a homosexual way, that they would take him out with a group of guys that were already in, and they would, let's go out for a night on the town in Rome. And they would, hey, why don't we go into this bar? And it was a gay bar. But the guy didn't know that, the guy who was being groomed in. And sure enough, it kind of dawned on him that, oh, wow, looking around, this is a gay bar. And then he would basically be teased. And then he would be basically invited in. And this would be part of the grooming process. And I was just, again, stunned. And then he went on to tell me, he started pointing out some of the guys that were leaders in it, guys that were like a couple at the seminary, and even faculty that were also involved, including one priest who was identified in the Pennsylvania grand jury report as an abuser of 18 to 25-year-olds. And he was on the staff at the North American College.
Well, that's the point. One of the points is that the seminaries were hothouses of homosexual activity. And of course, the North American College is where, to some extent, you go there, and that means you're in wanting to be a bishop, right? You're getting an international experience, you're getting a Roman experience, you're getting an experience of how the big church works. And if you turn out to be a certain talent, and it turns out, a lot of it is, it turned out if you were homosexual, because the homosexual bishops want to promote homosexual men because they have something in common and they can keep each other's secrets, right? And so there's this incredible pattern.
And just to say, Janet, just to say that out loud, it's just like shocking. Like that never would have dawned on me that is possible in my church, even though I was at the seminary and that was going on. I never sat down and tried to say, what's the strategy here? How's this going on? I had the naive idea that said, well, if the faculty find out about it, they're going to ruthlessly cut it off and be done with it. And again, that was just radical, not only being naive, it was also a culture that said, duck and cover. Just like, if this is the world you're living in, do you want to get ordained? That's your question. If you want to get ordained, just jump through the hoops, duck and cover, get ordained, and then you can say, whew, I'm glad I got through that.
Yeah. Only to meet the trouble on the other side. If you're not a part of that group, if you're not a part of the corrupt group that is leading a homosexual lifestyle, likely embezzling, not teaching church teaching, and you decide that you need to do that, that's not received well. And I can't tell you, I spend a lot of my days talking to priests who have done something bold, taught that homosexuality is not in accord with God's plan for sexuality, and gotten in trouble with his fellow priests and with his bishop for doing so. They say, why is this? Again, this is all of us are learning to look at the church through a whole new template, and obviously it goes far back. I don't know how far back it goes. I've gotten back to the 1960s, but I talked to a young man who's now in his 50s. But in the 1960s, he was abused by two priests in Detroit in the mid-1960s. There were four priests who lived together in the same rectory, and all of them were abusing boys. He said every Thursday night, the priest would have a night for boys, and they would watch a baseball game. And their parents were so excited. They were all going with other boys off to the rectory to watch baseball games. And he told me that every night, now when it's 8 o'clock at night, he has an anxiety attack because it was 8 o'clock at night that the priest would start to abuse him. Now, and he said he knew very well they were grooming him to become a priest so that he would be one of them and he would not blow the whistle on them, and he would continue their heritage and their practice. So I'm thinking that's early 1960s. I was thinking most of it was in the 70s and 80s, but the priests that were abusing him obviously came out of the 50s. So I'm thinking, how far back does this go? And so I don't know. I don't know when it started and how it started, but I do know that somewhere along the line, the pattern got to be that there were very highly placed men in the church, cardinals, right, who were very charming, appeared very orthodox, right, were beloved by the popes and the people. They'd go to Rome with suitcases full of money, right, and nobody's going to be listening to anything that critical about them because they were paying a lot of the bills, and they were choosing the next round of priests, and I mean the next round of bishops, and the bishops are the ones who choose the vocation directors, and the bishops are the ones who chose the rectors of the seminaries. And pretty soon they're choosing themselves. They're just replicating themselves. And that's what happened in the 70s and 80s. We had not just a trickle, but kind of a preponderance of a homosexual presence in the seminary. This is told in the book by Michael Rose, Goodbye, Good Men. Incredible book. Michael Rose, Goodbye, Good Men. Father Donald Cousin's book, The Changing Face of the Priesthood. He was a seminary rector, and he said that the priesthood is in danger of, or is already predominantly, a homosexual profession. Like, that was in the early 2000s that he's saying this. So, we're not making this up, and it isn't just rumor, right? It's not rumor.
Well, and so just another story. I was asked to give a retreat to seminarians, and it was a week-long retreat. So I had a whole bunch of talks to give, and so they wanted me to address, chastity and celibacy, and I said, great. And so I remember the formation director that was there with me. He said, so, okay, now we're going to be talking about these themes, chastity and celibacy. He said, are you going to talk about it from the standpoint of someone with same-sex attraction? I think he probably didn't say it like that. He probably just said, for men here who are gay. And I was like, what? It didn't even dawn on me that I needed to do that. And so I said, well, how many guys are we talking about? So he took out the list of retreatants. It was almost half. It was literally just under half of the guys that were on the retreat were gay. And he knew it. He knew that they were self-identified as same-sex attracted. And this is in the late 2000s. So this isn't just in the 70s, 80s, or even in the 90s. This is a prominent archdiocese that had almost half of the guys be self-identifying as gay.
It always takes my breath away. I keep reading these things and hearing these things, but it always takes my breath away. So the fact is, we've got a significant portion of bishops who themselves are likely to be practicing homosexuals, or have, right?
Or who have friends.
Or who have friends who have, exactly. And they were promoted by those friends, and they feel indebted to those friends. And so there's a sense in which you can't blow the whistle because your friends will be outed. And I spoke recently with a bishop who was kind of scolding me that I was saying this so often about homosexuals in the priesthood. And he said, you have to understand the fatherly sense that a bishop has towards his priests. And he told me that he had brought in his priests and asked them, the ones he knew to be same-sex attracted, and all of them assured him that they were living lives of celibacy. And I kind of sitting there, I'm thinking, do I say this or not? And I said, well, Bishop, but celibacy, they mean they're not married. It doesn't mean they're being chaste. And he goes, oh, fair enough, fair enough. I'm thinking, we both know this. You can't bamboozle me, and so you know, I can be bamboozled, believe me, I've been bamboozled for decades, but I'm getting a little clued in here. And then he's telling me, you know, that these are like his sons. Of course they should be. But and he said, so, you know, when you find out that they're doing these things, you know, you have to take into account that we respond to them as sons. I said, believe me, if I were married and my husband were unfaithful, I said, or my brother were unfaithful, or if I had a son who were unfaithful, I'm not easier on him because he's my father or my son or my brother. I said, I'm very demanding. I said, you got to stop. I said, and you're harming the whole family. You're harming the children. You're not just having a indiscretion on the side. There's no indiscretions on the side. And like, he was stunned. You know, I said, the lady we don't, you know, maybe we don't understand fully the loyalty you have among each other, but you don't understand our intolerance of this kind of behavior among our loved ones. Mm-hmm. And so it was news to him. And I'm thinking, so we've got this group of priests who went through the seminary at a time when there was a lot of this activity going on. And now they're all their friends are everywhere. Their predecessors, if they go into the files and they find out all this stuff has been covered up, they're actually going to be blowing the whistle on a predecessor. Predecessor probably helped them get where they are, or help somebody get where they are. So that's one kind of priest, the homosexually active, and then the cooperator, if you will, the one who can't do anything about it. And a lot of those are very ambitious men, unfortunately.
Well, you know, I've heard stories about, you know, a priest who hear about this in their priest support groups, right? So if you're in a Jesu Caritas or some other priest support group, and you're there and you have not just the priestly fraternity, but a bond of privacy or confidentiality in what's shared in that group, and it's in that group that they start, you know, a member shares that, you know, he's not only same-sex attracted, but he's been having a gay relationship, you know, as a priest. You know, are you going to turn him in? You know, what are you going to do? Well, no, I'm here to support him. I'm here to help him. I'm here to, you know, help him walk through this. And, you know, I've heard stories about, you know, groups like that where it can be several members, you know, that, you know, a priest might go in there thinking, oh, I'm going to find priestly support, you know, for my priesthood, and then discover that, you know,
they're engaging in some kind of cover-up.
Several of the guys are involved in gay relationships or same-sex attracted and struggling, and you know, what are they going to do? And they themselves, who knows, they could be struggling with pornography or with a heterosexual relationship, right? So that's not as if that doesn't happen either.
Who's helping them? I spoke to a group who was present at this point with a group of psychologists that said that, of course, their workload has exponentially exploded with people who are coming to them because of sex abuse issues. Because all of it has triggered people, whether it's by priests or whether it's by family members or whoever, but the whole thing has just gone crazy. But this one woman said, oh yes, I have several priests among my clientele. And she said, one's in a same-sex relationship, and he's not bothered by the relationship. It's just issues he has that are disrupting the relationship. The same thing with another man who's involved with a woman, another priest who's involved with a woman. He's not there to figure out what to do about should he stay in this relationship or how does he get out of this relationship, but how can it be a better relationship? And these are good Catholic psychologists that I was with. And they're thinking, like, what's my obligation? What am I supposed to do about these priests that are coming to me that are perfectly comfortable with their double life, at least ostensibly so? And so that's the widespreadness of this issue. And it's, I mean, I talked with a priest he's a very good Orthodox priest. And one day I'm talking about, you know, it's not just a problem of abuse of minors, but it's also the double lives. And he just kept saying, one's a crime, and the other's a sin. You got to keep that straight. One's a crime and one's a sin. I said, well, that is certainly true. I said, but what a sin. I said, just because you say one's a crime and one's a sin, it doesn't mean, oh, it's a sin like overeating, or, you know, it's a sin like oversleeping. It's not that kind of just a sin, right? It's a sin it's a mortal sin, and it's a mortal sin that has an impact immediately upon him and his ability to be a priest and to be a good priest to others and to call them to a moral life. So it's certainly,
it's something that we've brought up. if a priest is compromised like that in his own spiritual walk with God in terms of his vows and chastity, how strong will he be in promoting the full teaching of the church when it comes to things like contraception and no-fault divorce and sex outside of marriage and living together before marriage and masturbation, right? Will these things ever be talked about? Will they be addressed? Will he provide good formation for his people to be able to address these things? Or will it be, well, no, just in conscience, kind of, you're on a journey. So in conscience, just sort of sense what's right for you. And we know just how little we've heard the fullness of the church's teaching in these matters, which is life-giving, right? This is life-giving stuff. This is what leads to flourishing. And it's like,
it's a heartbreak of all these people we know that could be helped by their priests to lead a better life, and they're just wallowing in misery because no one has ever called them to make the right decisions. They just keep making bad decisions that lead their life into more and more misery. And they've never been.
Here's another element to this, right? So it's the culture of compromise, but it's also the culture of don't get out of line, right? There's the form of clericalism at work here, where not only has the buddy system and the cronyism led to advancing those who are with you, but if you step out of line, even just a little bit, right, you're going to be sidelined. You're going to be pushed off into, some far off assignment, right? It's the kind of thing that we've known. I'll tell a story. So I mentioned that I've been of support to the bishops wherever I've lived, and I lived in the Archdiocese of Seattle for about 20 years, and came out here at the invite of Archbishop Murphy, who then sadly died, and then Archbishop Brunette, and then Archbishop Sarton. And so I was at the service of Archbishop Sarton for years and years and years, helping advance and promote things that the diocese was doing. And doing that not only through my radio program, heard in the Archdiocese of Seattle, but all kinds of other ways that I was helping, especially with things like same-sex marriage. And I was asked to be the principal spokesman that would present the church's teaching in these matters. Anyways, when this whole crisis came out, I started to speak more prophetically about things and strongly about the need to step up. And he got some communication to him from one of his priests that I had said something on the radio that was too critical. And so I got called into the bishop's office, called into the archbishop's office. And he said that basically, because of what I spoke over the course of about 30 seconds on one of my 1-hour programs over the course of 15 years, supporting him, promoting the church's teaching, but I had said one thing for 30 seconds, that I was essentially going to be sidelined, that he wouldn't be able to engage and involve me in the way that he had in the past. And I'm like, Archbishop, did you even hear the whole program? No. Did you hear any of the other programs I did where I read your statements and supported you, promoted you, prayed for the other bishops, supported their statements? Did you listen to any of those? No, I haven't. But that 130 seconds, and what I was critiquing was the Pope's extraordinary synod, where they failed to bring up the issue of the sexual abuse of non-minors. And that's what I was critiquing. And he felt like that was out of bounds, so much so that he couldn't, I got out of line for 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And that was enough to sideline me. I'm like, wow, that's so striking to me. And I think about all of the priests that get out of line all the time in their preaching, or what they're not saying in their preaching, or their teaching.
Right. No, it's the Orthodox person that's going to be chastised anytime you criticize the episcopacy. I mean, you have Father James Martin going all over the earth, teaching basically teaching that homosexual relationships are just fine, that you're made that way and it's just fine. And he's not being disciplined. But a priest or someone that says something like you say, or a priest that says something immediately gets disciplined. So that tells you an enormous amount about the culture. I mean, today I just read an article that's out in the Associated Press about Father Donald McGuire, who was a Jesuit priest who was very involved with Mother Teresa. Do you remember him at all? He had quite a cult following. I remember listening to some of his his sermons, his talks, they were beautiful. This is the story of one man who was abused 1,000 times, he says, by McGuire from the time he was a very little boy. It's a horrible story, but a remarkable part of it is he's become friends and collaborators with another man. I think the name is something like Cineflu. And this man was a supporter of McGuire's. And this one man, Cineflu, I think his name is, he was an assistant to McGuire, even in all of his lawsuits, and went through all of his records and was defending him. And then at one point he made contact, an incredible story, with this man who was abused by McGuire for all these years. And he himself, at a certain period of time, the scales fell from his eyes and he saw who McGuire was. And now he has taken upon himself contacting victims, the very people that he was trying to find dirt on so that he could ruin them in their cases against McGuire. He's now trying to help them sue the order because of what McGuire did to them. Now, I was talking to a friend about this and I said, this man that's now helping the victims, I said, he has had to say, I covered up. I went after innocent victims to try to find dirt on them to defend McGuire because I was so under his spell. And I said, how many of us would do that? How many of us would just instead say, shake our shoulders, say, oh, I didn't know, I don't want to think about this, I'm getting on with my life. But instead, he's trying to go back and make up for what he's done. Someday, we have to have a bishop that comes forward and says, I have to admit it, I covered up. I've covered up for a long time. I knew in seminary and I didn't speak out. I knew when I was a priest and I didn't speak out. I knew when I was a bishop and I covered up. And I have to admit I did it. And I may even have to admit that I've been an active homosexual. I have to admit that. Then I have to admit I'm profoundly remorseful for this. But the only way this is going to change is if people come out and admit what has happened. And, right now, all we're asking them to do is to admit the sins of other people, right? Admit the sins of other people and say, this bishop did this and this bishop did that, and there was cover up and this priest did this, and come out about that. But at some time, they have to start confessing their own sins in this respect, like this man's doing. And I read this and I think nothing impresses me more than a person that will come out and publicly say, I did some really bad stuff and I'm really sorry for it and I'm making up for it. Now we're not, who knows when we're going to see this? As I said, the bishops are the problem. But the day that first bishop stands up and says, yes, when I was a bishop of such and such a place, I covered up like crazy. I've said for the last 3 years, I don't do it. I've never done it. I've got new programs. It'll never happen here again. But I have to admit, I've done it. That's when we're going to have a breath of fresh air. And I hope other bishops will say, okay, if he can do it, I can do it. We get that ball rolling where we start getting people admitting what it is. And then you get the cleanup. Then you get the victim saying, someone's acknowledging it now. And we're not getting in we're going to have to stop. I think we're towards our end, and this we need to talk about further.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I mean, the sacrament of confession begins with the act of self-accusation, right? And I think we're so busy with self-defense and denials that we've lost sight of self-accusation as the path to real peace.
I just read on Twitter, Matthew Schmitz, who's one of the editors at First Things. It was very amazing. He went down and he confessed all the times that he thought he was too harsh on people and where he was unfair in the last year. I said this about someone that really wasn't very charitable about me, and I did this. And I'm thinking, whoa, wouldn't that be pretty phenomenal at the end of the year that people regularly, everybody doesn't have to do it, but that people really felt they had a bad year. They had a bad year for just not being the kind of person they want to be. Matthew Schmitz did this. I'm thinking, could a few others people do that? And just say this. Now, what I'm asking of the bishops is huge. There's very few people on the face of the earth in a position of prominence who has ever done such a thing. But when have we been in this particular situation in the church? And I'm not telling them they should do it. What I'm really saying is I'm asking to pray about it and go before the Blessed Sacrament and say, because I think a lot of people should never confess their worst sins publicly. No, it's not right. All right, that's between you and God for the most part, but this isn't between them and God, because it's ruined the church. All right, and they have to ask God. They have to say, do you want me to do this? Do you want me to do this? And if you want me to do this, please give me the grace, because I'm guessing, I'd say about myself, I don't know that I would have it in me to do that. All right. So it's not going to be me that's doing it. It's going to have to be the Holy Spirit is giving you the grace to do this thing. So you can still hold, they're afraid, everybody will think I'm awful. How can I hold my head up in public? How can I do anything? Everybody's going to realize how terrible I am. And I'm going to say, yeah, there's some people who are going to just think you're awful and they want your head on a platter. And there are other people who are just going to think you just are unbelievably spectacular leader in this world.
Well, Janet, on our next show, we can take a look at a theme that Pope Francis identifies as very significant in this whole crisis, which is clericalism. Because I think it does touch upon clericalism, and we'll have our own way of discussing that and let that shed some more insight into what's happening in the church today. Again, we want to thank you all for tuning in, whether you're listening or watching. We do encourage you to subscribe to our YouTube channel and also subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Hopefully by the time this is posted, you'll be able to find the Janet Smith and Tom Curran Review podcast on iTunes. Thanks so much, and God bless you.
God bless you.